Welcome to this Wise Words academic seminar hosted by the Contemplative Studies Center at the University of Melbourne. I'm Nicholas Van Dam, the director of the Contemplative Studies Center. I'd like to begin by respectfully acknowledging the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional owners of the land on which many of us here in Melbourne and elsewhere are residing. We pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging, and to any Indigenous or First Nations people joining us today. Today, we're joined by Dr. Karin Matko, a postdoc at Chemnitz University of Technology in Germany, who researches the working mechanisms of meditation and yoga. She holds a PhD in psychology and is a certified yoga teacher. In today's presentation, Karin will discuss the results of several research studies investigating the effectiveness of different meditation techniques and traditions, as well as their implications for a theory of meditation. If you have any questions, please post them in the Q&A at any stage during the presentation, and Karin will address as many of them as possible towards the end of the session. Thank you for joining us, and welcome, Karin.
Yes, thank you for inviting me and for your warm welcome and kind introduction. I'm very pleased to be here, and before we start with the presentation, I'd like to start with a short meditation. So to settle in, find a comfortable position, close your eyes, and then find an upright posture, either sitting or standing, and allow your mind to settle. Maybe you've already had a long day, or your day has just started. And allow all these mind chatter to slowly calm down. And then elongate your spine, and at the same time feel supported, as if you were leaning onto a strong tree. And you feel the support from behind. And now bring your attention to your breathing. Observe how the air travels through your nostrils, down into your belly, and the other way, up and out again. Feel the cool air while you inhale, and the warm air when you exhale. And try to stay focused on your breathing. Everything that was, has been, or will be is not that important in this moment. And we can use our breath to enter the here and now. Through observing your breath, you can open the door to presence, to this present moment. And when you realize that your mind begins to wander, don't be harsh on yourself. Be kind and forgiving, and just return to your breathing. And now, smile a little bit. Smile to yourself. Smile to the world. And now slowly open your eyes again. Welcome back. If you want, move a little bit. Take a deep breath. And again, a warm welcome. To this talk, and I will today be talking about the question, what is meditation and how does it work? So what we just did is probably one of the most common meditation techniques that practice around the world and across different traditions, observing the breath. But at the same time, you might have realized that we did a lot of different things during meditation. And this is what happens very often, because we very often don't know what people are actually doing while they're meditating. Sometimes we use terms such as mindfulness meditation, which is not very specific. And we really don't know what mindfulness meditation means. So it's very hard to understand what people do. And at the same time, when you look at this picture, people often think, when they talk about meditation, they often think of a person like this girl sitting in a cross-legged position, eyes closed, and doing nothing from the outside, observing her thoughts, observing her breath. And this perspective appears a bit short-sighted, because meditation is actually practiced all over the world and in all kinds of traditions and in all kinds of forms. So when we look, for example, at Christianity, they practice meditation called centering prayer, which entails repeating sacred words or sentences and using prayer beds for this. Or we have Sufi whirling. So in this technique, people circle or spin around their own axis for minutes or even hours and do this as a type of meditation. Or if we look at these two gentlemen, these are traditional yogis that do yoga meditation in a cave, covered in ashes, surrounded by all kinds of pictures and artifacts of certain deities. And this is also a form of meditation. And this whole variety is here has not been acknowledged so far in research and also in the current perception of meditation. So this was the starting point of my research. Just a little disclaimer, I will not be able to answer the question, what is meditation today? Because it's far too complex. But I hope I will give you some information on the background and on the variety of techniques that meditation can take. And I also present the classification system that we developed through several studies. So what is meditation? What do people mean by meditation? They could mean different techniques, like I just presented to you. They could also refer to different states. There can be different meditative states. And sometimes people already also say that meditation is not a technique, it's actually a state. We could also talk about different frameworks, because meditation is always embedded in a framework. So traditionally, for example, in Buddhism or yoga, you have a whole range of practices. You have ethical teachings, you have breathing techniques, you have yoga postures. So, and all this combined makes the practice of meditation. You also have secular frameworks, like, for example, mindfulness-based stress reduction, where also different techniques are combined and practiced together and taught in a specific secular way. And then you can also talk about the applications of meditation. And this is actually the area of research that has received the most attention. So does meditation help against depression or anxiety, or does it help in fostering well-being and reducing stress? And of course, all of these things work together. So it could be that there is a technique that is particularly helpful against depression, or it could be that different techniques are associated with different states, or that different states happen when you practice in different frameworks. And you see there is a lot of different questions around this topic of meditation and what it is and how to define this. So today I will focus on the techniques. So one of the earliest differentiations between meditation techniques was done by Lutz et al. And they split meditation techniques into two groups: focused attention and open monitoring. And this differentiation is still quite prevalent in recent research. So the main difference is the focus of attention. So in focused attention, you do have an object of attention. So for example, the breathing, or parts of your body, or certain syllables. So you have something what your mind can work with, or where it can concentrate on. Whereas in open monitoring, you do not have such an object. So you sit there and you just observe anything that is happening inside your mind or around you. So all thoughts, emotions, sensations. And as you can see already here, this really just depicts a part of the practices that there are. And it's sometimes not that easy to say whether a technique is focused or open, because you can also switch between the two, similarly as we did in the beginning. So there has been another recent classification system proposal where they acknowledge this and try to be more inclusive. And they proposed three different families of meditation techniques. So we have the attentional family that entails these two techniques. But we also have the constructive family, which entails constructing, for example, positive emotions, loving kindness, compassion, but also constructing visualization, images. And they proposed a deconstructive family, which entails practices that aim at the dissolution of the self, the deconstruction of the self. But this family also entails techniques from cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a bit odd when you think about it. It's interesting to also include this, but it's not only meditation, and it's not as fine-grained as it could be. And it also not includes all kinds of techniques that there are. So to summarize, what do we know so far? What is meditation? It's an umbrella term subsuming a variety of different techniques. There have been several classification systems that have been proposed that were developed top-down from the researcher's perspective. And there have been some comparative studies that found differential effects. So they compared, for example, focused attention to open monitoring or to loving kindness, and then they found they have different effects on, for example, positive effect. But what is still missing? What do we not know? So we have no clear definition of meditation. We do not know what meditation is and what it is not. So we have no demarcation criteria. We have no comprehensive theory that would help us to understand why meditation works, for whom, under which circumstances, and for which aims or conditions. And so far, there has been little systematic research to address these questions. So what did we do? We set out to uncover the variety of techniques and compare their effects in a systematic way, and starting from the bottom up. So this means we conducted several studies. The first one was an interview study. Then we did 2 surveys with experienced meditators, and we did an intervention study with beginners. And I will walk you through these different studies now. So first question was, what do meditators actually do when they meditate? And for this means I approached 20 experienced meditators and asked them exactly these questions. What do you do when you meditate? What do you teach your students when they want to learn meditation? Also did a thorough literature search and identified 309 meditation techniques. Obviously, a lot of these techniques are very similar or even identical. That's why we reduced these techniques through several systematic steps to 50 basic techniques. And they're basic in a way that they're kind of underlying all other techniques that are combined or that are practiced in combination. And I recently participated in a science slam where I tried to present my research in a more humorous way. And for this purpose, I decided to place all these 309 techniques onto one slide. So this is what it looks like. As you can see, quite a lot, and not able to fit all this in a slide. So that's why we reduced them to 50. And then we wanted to check, is this list of meditation comprehensive? Is our selection a good selection? That's why we did another survey. We did a survey and asked over 600 meditators how much experience they had with each of these 50 techniques. So whether they really practiced these techniques. And we had quite a large sample, which I was very happy about. We had 61% women, a mean age of 52 years, and a very experienced sample. So the mean experience was 15 years of meditation, and the mean practice time was 6 times per week for 31 minutes. So very true meditators that really do this quite often. And as you can see here, this is a list of meditation traditions that we were able to reach. And you can see there's a lot of different Buddhist traditions, a lot of Hindu traditions, but also smaller groups such as Sufism, Christianity, or Qigong. And we asked the meditators about their experience, about their practice, and about these 50 techniques. And we also asked them whether we had missed something and they wanted to add something. And this is how we could check whether our list was comprehensive, which techniques were especially popular, which techniques were often practiced together. And as you can see, this is a lot of questions. There's a lot of analysis into this. And if you're interested, you can read the paper. It's been published, and you find the reference at the end of the presentation. You will also receive the presentation. And so today I will only present a part of these results. And this is why I brought to you the top 10 meditation techniques. You don't need to read all this in detail. So these are the 10 techniques that meditators across the whole sample said they were practicing the most or had the most experience with. And you can find here, there's a lot of techniques that concern observing the body or observing the breath. We also have some observing thoughts. We have compassion-based meditation styles and singing sutras or mantras. And then you might say, okay, this is a list that sounds very Buddhist or Hindu, which is not surprising because most of the sample were Buddhists or Hindus, meditators. But then we did some other analysis looking at the top 10 preferred technique in all kinds of traditions, so in 12 different traditions. And what we found, which was really interesting, was that this group of body-based techniques, observing the body, observing the breath, was very, very popular in every tradition. And it was popular for beginners, it was popular for advanced meditators, it was just everywhere. And this was the first time this was examined in such a systematic way. So we can really say, okay, there is something to these body-centered techniques. They're really, really popular and people really do practice them the most. So then we decided to go a step further and to further reduce these this whole huge variety, because it's, you can imagine 50 techniques, or 52 because we had to add 2, is a bit too much to really compare each of them. So that's why we did another survey study to develop a classification system of meditation in a bottom-up way. So again, we had a very experienced sample of 100 meditators with 15 years of experience from, again, a variety of different traditions. And this time we took the 20 most popular techniques, which we had identified before. And we asked our meditators to do pairwise comparisons. So to compare each technique to each other technique. So how similar do you think is observing the breath to doing the body scan, or to repeating syllables? And then they had to mark this. And with these pairwise comparisons, you can do a statistical analysis that's called multidimensional scaling. And what this analysis gives you is a matrix like this. And then your job as a researcher is to make sense of this. So to try to find what are the dimensions that are underlying this matrix, which are the implicit dimensions that meditators used to evaluate, is this technique similar to this other or not? And this is what we did, what we found in our data. And we found 2 dimensions, which we labeled activation and amount of body orientation. So activation is from top to bottom. So at the top, you can see there is more active kinds of meditation, meditation with movement, manipulating the breath. And at the bottom, there is more quiet or less active meditation techniques, like sitting in silence or lying meditation, so meditation in a supine position. And then from left to right, we have amount of body orientation. So on the left, we have techniques that have not an explicit focus on the body, like cultivating compassion, for example, or contemplating on a question, for example, who am I? And on the right side, we have techniques that have a more explicit focus on the body, like observing the breath, observing the body, walking, observing the senses. And so this is quite interesting, because we found 2 dimensions that were embodied, that were related to the body. And this is also the first time that this was actually incorporated in meditation research, because as you've seen before, the other meditation technique, the classification systems relied more on attentional dimensions. So is this a focused attention or open attention meditation? And leaving out the body, which is, as we can see, very prevalent for meditators. And what we also found here are 7 clusters of meditation. So you can find which techniques are similar because they are close to each other. They have not a wide distance similarity from the ratings of our meditators. And we decided to group them into 7 clusters. The first cluster up in the right upper corner is we called meditation with movement. So this entails all kinds of meditations where you use movement, walking meditation, whirling. Then we have the cluster of body-centered meditation, again, body-centered meditation. So observing the breath, observing the body. Then below we have a cluster called mindful observation, sitting in silence, observing your thoughts. So this is what is closest to the open awareness, the open monitoring classification. Then we have contemplation. So sitting and contemplating on a question, who am I, what happens if I die, or contemplating on a contradiction, a paradox, a koan, what sound does one hand make when you clap, things like this. Then we have affect-centered meditation. So all these techniques that try to develop, for example, feelings of kindness or compassion, but also techniques that are like opening up to blessings, like more spiritually. And then we have a mantra meditation cluster here, which entails this repeating syllables, singing sutras, singing mantras. And in the center, we have the visualizations, the all techniques where you either visualize an image or you concentrate on an object, like a candle, for example. So what do we do now? So we have here 7 clusters of techniques, which are more specific than what was proposed before. And we can also see, okay, we don't find this focused attention meditation technique here, because you can focus on all kinds of different objects. And so in my opinion, I think it's easier to see, okay, is this a meditation with movement? Is this a body-centered meditation? Is this a visualization technique? And so we propose that we can use this classification system to now compare these techniques and to see whether the groupings that are based on expert ratings really also show in the data. So are the techniques that are grouped in one group really more similar than techniques from another group? This is what we did. So we took this classification system and we picked one technique from each cluster. So then we had 7 techniques. And then we randomly drew 4 techniques, because 7 techniques would be too much to compare in a study. And what did we randomly pick? We picked meditation with sound, walking meditation, concentration on an object, and observing thoughts. And the interesting thing here is that I'm just writing up the paper, and there's really not much research into these types of meditation except observing thoughts. And this leads us directly to the intervention study. So now we go to the second part of the talk. How does meditation work? And again, a disclaimer, I will not be able to answer this question, because we did just one study, and obviously that's not enough. And we have to do more studies and really evaluate also more longer interventions, for example. And we used a study design that's not quite common. It's a single case, experimental single case study, and I will just walk you through in a bit. And then I will present you our results that we got preparing these 4 techniques. And also we have some longitudinal data and some qualitative data. So we did a single case multiple baseline study with 42 participants, which is a quite large sample for such a study design. All of these participants were healthy young adults, like 3/4 were students and some employees, and they had no experience with meditation before. So meditation naive sample. And what does this study design look? So participants enter the study, they are randomized, complete a pretest, like in a usual study, and then they enter a baseline phase, which means they receive daily online questionnaires measuring their well-being, their body awareness, emotion regulation, all kinds of variables, but they continue to live their life as usual, so that we have a baseline which we can compare our results to. Then after some time, the treatment starts. So they still continue to fill out the daily questionnaires, but now they participate in the meditation treatment. So in this case, we met once a week for an hour, we meditated together, we discussed any problems or questions they had, and participants were encouraged or were supposed to meditate every day for 20 minutes at home. And we also monitored their meditation practice and their experience with meditation. And why is this called a multiple baseline study? Because the baselines have different lengths. This allows us to experimentally control whether any changes are really due to the start of the treatment and don't happen before. In our case, the baselines were 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or 4 weeks long, and the treatment phase was 8, 7, or 6 weeks accordingly. And then participants completed post-test and also follow-up. And in this case, I also did like an explorative follow-up study where we measured each month how participants felt, how they were doing, how they were meditating, and how the dependent variables developed over the course of 1 year. And we had the 4 meditation techniques, as I said before. We had observing thoughts. We had humming meditation, which means you sit there and you hum for a while, and then you listen to the silence that follows the humming. With walking meditation, so very slowly, deliberately walking, and concentration on an object, where we presented our participants with a range of objects, like a candle, a glass of water, a simple picture, and participants should pick one of these objects, and then they were supposed to look at this object with their eyes open and try to focus on this object. Okay, and so first of all, we checked, did our participants meditate? And yes, they did. And they were also paid for the study, so they received either 50 euro or quad credit for participation, and they really did meditate for 15 to 20 minutes over the course of the study. And then I now show you a sample of the data. How does this data look like? And these are 12 participants, all from the observing thoughts group. And this is their body awareness, which we measured twice a week, so every 2 or 3 days. And the orange dots are the baseline phase, the measurements in the baseline phase, and the blue triangles are the measurements in the treatment phase. And what you can see here, what you usually don't see in a pre-post design, is that there is quite a variability between participants regarding their general level of body awareness, the variability of body awareness over time, and also in their response to the treatment. So for example, we have participant 29 on the top left, whose body awareness did not change at all. Just fluctuates, but no effect. Then we have participants 27 beneath, where we can see a very clear effect. So no effect on the baseline, but as soon as the treatment starts, we see a more or less linear increase of body awareness. For participant 23, where it's also very linear. So the more you practice, the higher your body awareness gets. But then we also have participant 29 in the bottom, where you can see that actually body awareness drops with the treatment. So it gets worse, and we don't know why. But in these kinds of designs, because they're treated as single cases and we have a lot of data from them, we can look into these single cases and try to see, okay, why did body awareness decrease for this participant? And what we can also observe here is a much higher time resolution. So we can see, how did body awareness really change over time? Was it a sudden jump with the beginning of the treatment? Was it a linear increase? Was it going up and down? Actually the study was done in beginning of 2020. So the last 2 weeks of the study were happening during the first outbreak of the pandemic. And we don't see this here in body awareness, but in other variables, we actually see a sudden decline in the last 2 weeks of the study, which is probably due to COVID. And then what you can do with the data, so one, you can visually analyze how this develops, and then you can calculate specific effect sizes. So there have been several effect sizes proposed for single case designs, and in our case we calculate the tau u that takes into account the differences between the levels and the slopes in treatment and baseline phase. And then you can actually do a meta-analysis where you treat each participant as a study. And here you can draw a forest plot, and you can see, okay, participants differ in their reaction to the treatment. And there's one participant that we have already seen in the visual analysis, 21, who did not benefit. But then there are some where no change is obvious. And then the majority shows an increase in body awareness. And this tau u can be interpreted like R. So we can actually see quite large effects for some participants. And the mean effect, you can see at the bottom, is a moderate increase in body awareness for this group of participants. And then you can also compare the different conditions. And here are some box plots where the single dots in each box plot depict the participants. And here you can see that actually all 4 conditions improved body awareness to a similar extent, and that the observing thoughts meditation was actually the one with the highest variance in this respect. And as this was an explorative study, because we know so little about how meditation works, how which variables are affected by meditation, which are the important mechanisms, that's why you collected a lot of variables, different variables. And I did the same analysis, visual analysis, effect size estimation for these different variables. And then I plotted them in a spider plot, which looks like this. So you see all 4 techniques and their effect on these 5 variables. And what you can see is that all 5 show a very similar, or 4 techniques show a very similar profile. So their profiles overlap to a large extent. So they all have a small effect on well-being, a medium effect on body awareness. They decrease mind wandering, increase emotion regulation, and also increase decentering. And decentering is this skill where you are able to step back and like not get caught up in your thoughts or emotions. And yes, very similar quantitative effects. The only thing that we can see here is that maybe walking meditation had a slightly smaller effect on mind wandering and on decentering compared to the others, but these effects were not statistically significant, which might also be due to the relatively small subgroup samples that we had. But as I said, we also had the subjective experience. So we measured how each day, whether participants meditated and how their experience was with meditation. And here we can see that we have very, very different profiles for the 4 meditation techniques. And what I find quite interesting here is that observing thoughts and concentration were actually practiced the longest compared to the other 2 less well-known techniques. And this was true even though concentration meditation was perceived as the most difficult, the least relaxing, and the most tiring technique compared to the others. And contrary to observing thoughts, which was perceived as quite easy. And also quite interesting is that humming and walking were also perceived as quite easy. I mean, some participants said at the beginning it was quite unusual to do this type of meditation, but then they got used to it and found it actually quite relaxing. And then we also asked participants at the end of the study, did you experience any adverse events or altered states of consciousness during the study, which are related to your meditation practice? And then I calculated the mean number of adverse events reported. And you can see here that walking meditation, participants from this group reported the lowest number of adverse events and also of altered states of consciousness compared to observing thoughts or humming meditation. And I think this is a really interesting result because when we talk about people who have experienced trauma, for example, they also tend to experience adverse events during meditation. And we could maybe advise those people to practice walking or concentration meditation. Of course, we still have to evaluate this in other studies. And then we have the longitudinal results. Again, this is just an excerpt because I can't show you everything. So this again is body awareness. And so we have the baseline depicted here of the treatment and the follow-up that was like monthly measurements for a year. And what I think is most interesting here is that you can see that for most participants, so this was these were 14 participants that participated voluntarily after the end of the study. And so they didn't receive anything for this. But you can see that for these participants, actually body awareness stayed more or less the same or even increased for some participants. Although the meditation practice, we also asked them how much to meditate, showed a very steep decline over time. And this points to an interesting finding, I think, that meditation seems to lead to some kind of change in perspective. So once you realize, oh my God, I have a body and this body feels like this when I do certain things, then you can't unlearn this. So maybe this is one effect. But again, we still need to evaluate this in larger groups. And then we did some qualitative interviews with 24 participants. These are the results of 12 participants that we already analyzed. And we asked participants, how did you experience meditation? What were possible effects that you observed during or through meditation? Has anything changed? And then we did a thematic analysis where you identify themes that emerge from the data. And one theme we termed positive effects of meditation. And here, one thing that really was very central and what was mentioned by, I think, almost all participants was the feeling of relaxation and calmness they experienced through meditation, during meditation, and following meditation. And this was also one of the reasons why they meditated, because they wanted to experience this relaxation or calmness. But there were some differences between conditions as well. So feelings of warmth were reported in all groups except the concentration. So one participant here states, especially after meditation, everything felt somehow very warm inside. Then we had another theme, which we termed awareness. So all groups reported more awareness of different things, but also especially more awareness of the body. And we had some particularities again. So in walking meditation, people were talking about the feet, concentration more about their eyes, humming more about vibrations, and in observing thoughts, they were the only ones that were reporting feelings of body distortion. So like in this quote, in part, it felt like body parts did not belong to me anymore. Like, for example, the feet, that I had the feeling while sitting that they were not attached to my legs anymore, or simply a very weird feeling. And corresponding also feeling high or like floating was only reported in the groups observing thoughts and humming, which also corresponds to the greater amount of altered states of consciousness that were reported in these two groups. So to conclude, meditation can indeed be very diverse, as we have seen in the first studies. we have found a very strong preference for body-centered techniques across traditions, and also a very strong sense of embodied dimensions when people classified meditation or compared different techniques. We found 7 main clusters of techniques that could be used for future studies to compare these different techniques to each other. In our explorative study, we found that these 4 very, very different techniques showed actually quite similar quantitative effects on beginners. It might be that the effects differ if you have larger samples or if you have longer periods of meditation. At the same time, we found qualitative or experiential differences. So meditation indeed feels very different, and this could lead to the conclusion that actually you could practice the technique that you prefer because the effects might actually be the same. As calmness and body awareness were central qualitative outcomes of the study, and we observed long-term effects even though the meditation practice declined. What are future directions? Where should we go from here? We should extend research to compare and examine more techniques, also more diverse techniques. We should also evaluate the predictive value of individual factors and preferences, personality, motivation. We have gathered some data on this, but we still need to analyze it. We need to define key features and mechanisms. So what makes a practice meditation? And what are the key mechanisms? Could body awareness be such a mechanism? And then we can also explore, is there an overlap with related practices? Might it be that meditation is good for one person, but another person might prefer journaling or walking in the forest and having the same effects? And then we could develop theory or theories of meditation. I want to thank you for your attention. I want to thank my supervisor, Peter Zielmeier, who supervised all of these studies. I want to thank the 6 students that helped with the last intervention study, which was quite demanding. And 2 of these students also did the qualitative interviews. And I want to thank the Chemnitz University of Technology who funded the studies. Here's the literature, and now I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you for that incredibly fascinating and interesting presentation, especially for giving us that teaser of the new data. It's very cool and very exciting. There are a few questions in particular about the participants, particularly I think with respect to the last study, and then there's a couple of questions about the measures. So since they're kind of clarifying questions, I might just ask, so were the participants you said were beginners in the latter study, so were they totally meditation naive, never had any experience whatsoever?
Yes, so some of them said they might have tried a meditation app before, but didn't really get into it. So they might have done a meditation once or twice, but never for an extended period of time.
And did you have any information about sort of like religious or spiritual affiliation? And I guess I'm just wondering sort of if there was anything, whether that was linked to anything.
So I think we asked whether they had a religious affiliation. I think most of them didn't, except maybe some Christians. But I mean, I'm from East Germany, so religion doesn't really play a role in East Germany, mostly.
And what, so how did you measure? I mean, I'm particularly interested in how you measured the adverse events. So what, did you use a particular scale, or how did you go about doing that?
So we kind of collected all kinds of adverse events that were reported in earlier studies, and we had a list of 70 possible events. And so we asked, did this event happen? For how long did it happen or persist? And how severe was this event for you? So did it have an effect, or was it mild or severe? Yeah, and then we grouped these adverse events into groups of events. For example, altered state of consciousness, somatic changes in perception or in behavior, things like this.
And your measure of body awareness, what was that?
So that's why we had, and for body awareness, we had to develop our own measure, because the classic measures of body awareness are not meant to be used twice a week. And they also ask questions like, if I have a fever, I notice the temperature change, but obviously you don't have a fever every 2 days. So that's why we kind of extracted the 11 most suitable items. And we had a student who was doing a preparative work, and she also did a pilot study, and we did another pilot study. So we used the scale. We found that it was quite helpful for our purpose, but we still need to kind of check whether it's really valid in larger samples.
So I'll get into a particularly meaty question. One question from someone who says they're a sociologist asked the question, they're interested in the socioeconomic differences or potential socioeconomic differences. And I guess the question is whether or not meditation is for everyone and whether the effects might be the same across different parts of society. So curious to hear your thoughts on
that. This is for me, it's difficult to answer this question because obviously our first samples were experienced meditators who mostly also had a good socioeconomic background. So we found, for example, quite a few people who had a PhD, like definitely more than in the general population. And our sample, the intervention study, were obviously mostly students and some employees at the university, and not only the university, but I think from a similar socioeconomic background. And I think this is also well, disadvantage, because in meditation research you often do studies with people from a similar background. But I know there have been studies for I know some people who have done studies in South America with children from deprived schools, and they found it quite helpful for them. But obviously meditation is also something that what I would say is not obviously something, not definitely something for everyone. So maybe walking in the forest and observing what is happening in the forest might be the same for some, or better for someone.
Yeah, I think that that's particularly interesting within your results. That sort of, it seems like, particularly for beginners, it may not actually matter that much in terms of what they do. Another interesting question, do you think the similarities between the different techniques was because at a basic level, you're developing the same skills, so bringing awareness continually back to the object, and the differences in subjective results may be due to individual aptitudes in that given that particular skill?
So wait, it had 2 parts, this question, right?
Yeah, so the first part was whether or not whether the similarities between the different techniques might be because you're essentially developing the same skill.
Yes. Yeah, I think this is a very important question, because I think it definitely might be that we have similar skills that we develop, like body awareness, for example, or a more decentered perspective. And I think this perspective might also be kind of unique to meditation. And it might not depend on what technique you use, because you're kind of forced to look into your mind, kind of forced to observe what is happening in there. And that most people say, okay, oh my God, my mind is so full. What I also think might be, so we try to keep the techniques quite, not similar, but kind of, we have the same starting sentences, the same ending sentences. We also had the sentence that I used in the beginning, so that meditation, be kind to yourself. So it might have been that these general statements that were similar across techniques led to similar effects as well. Or maybe that, I mean, I led all the courses. Maybe it's because they were very similar, and it might have been different if you had a different teacher. I don't know.
And people only got one of the techniques, is that correct?
Yes, only one. And we asked them to remain with their technique. And we also asked them whether they changed the technique after the study. And some of them said, yeah, this was not a technique for me. I didn't really like it. And I like breathing and meditation more, for example.
I was thinking about the complexities of a crossover study with 4 different meditation styles. It sounds very interesting, but I feel like it'd be really hard to pull off.
Yeah. And for us, it was also very interesting to keep it very standardized and similar, so that we could rule out all other kinds of things, like, for example, tradition or background of the teacher or anything that could influence. We also, when participants asked, could you tell me more about the spiritual background of this practice? I said, no, I can't. I mean, yeah, you can read about it, but I won't give you the whole spiritual background of this.
So, and I guess just going back to the second part of that question, I guess, this is a question sort of I've thought about a bit myself. Do you think that like, and you hinted, I guess, a little bit at this, but do you have ideas about either how we would measure it or thoughts on where it might be in terms of like how a particular practice might intersect with people's sort of aptitude or propensity for practicing in that style?
Yes, I think there is definitely some kind of personal preference, and we observed this. So people, for example, in concentration meditation, many people said, oh my God, this is so difficult. I really don't want to do this. So most of the time, after some weeks, they kind of realized, okay, I can do it, so it's okay, but it's very, you need a lot of effort to do this practice. And on the other hand, like observing thoughts, most people were like, oh, this is so easy, which is interesting because you usually don't do this practice at the beginning. What people find sitting there and observing their thoughts was actually quite relaxing. So I think there is something, but at the same time, what I want to point out, sometimes you really have to force people to do something for 2 weeks to let them realize, is this really something that I don't like? Or is it just because I'm not used to this?
And I wonder if you have any further thoughts on like that. In particular, I thought it was interesting that I think it was the concentration group, they practiced, even though they said it was the hardest, they actually seemed to do the most of it. So I wonder if you have any thoughts on sort of what motivated them to actually stick with it, whereas, the walking in the other groups, even though it was easier, they didn't do as much of it.
Yeah, so maybe they actually, when you walk, you maybe realize the effect sooner, so you don't need to walk this long. They also said maybe walking was a bit, or could be stressful to find a place to walk or to really stay with the practice. And concentration, maybe they needed more time to really get into this, so they tried it longer. I'm not sure, it's just speculation. But it might also be that either the other two are more effective, like humming. I think humming is a very effective technique. You sit there and then you hum and you can't think about anything else because you're just humming and everything, the whole head is vibrating. Yeah, so actually this is something that I also do. Like if I feel I can't concentrate, I start humming or singing, and it calms you down.
Maybe one last cheeky question, since I have the opportunity. What do you think is the most kind of understudied meditation technique? In all your work, sort of looking at the different styles out there.
So I think all kinds of Hindu techniques are very understudied. So there's a lot of studies on mantra meditation, but that's basically it. So I think there's not many studies on walking meditation. There's not many studies on humming. There's not many studies on Sufi whirling. I mean, there are so many techniques that have not been studied because we have been focusing on breathing and body scan and loving kindness.
Well, thank you so much for that fascinating talk, and thank you for the discussion as well. And thank you to the audience for joining us. Please subscribe to our newsletter to stay informed about this and other upcoming events hosted by the Contemplative Study Center. We will post the recording of this event as soon as we can. And we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you.